Hello, everyone, and welcome to another series of Foundry virtual events. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Joyce, and I'm the Field Marketing Manager here at Foundry. On today's session, I have Chris Weatherly, Associate Product Manager here at Foundry, and I've got Josh Parks, Senior Compositor at Important Looking Pirates. So before we dive straight into Josh's session, I wanted to share just a couple of updates. So we've got webinars, skill ups, and sessions sections in the Foundry virtual events. We've got over 35 webinars on demand and available on Livestorm. For more information on our listings, or if you want to share your feedback, we have any questions for us, you can send us an email on virtual.events@foundry.com, or for more information on the listings, it would be on foundry.com/events. We've got two upcoming webinars, Framestore Launchpad Internship, The Making of Behind the Scenes, which is a project created by students for University of Hertfordshire. They'll be sharing their project and more of a deep dive into how they did it. We will also have a Bring Your Own Comp event, a partnership with London AC and SIGGRAPH on October the 15th. For more information on how to register, just go onto our events page. For Foundry Learn, we've got plenty of Learn material, documentations, release notes, developer docs, and Nuke trainer materials. So for more information on any of the things you wanted to learn, tutorials, etc., you can have a look at our learn.foundry.com webpage. And also stay up to date with us. We've got some great content in our Insights Hub, some case studies and articles as well. For more information, updates, or what we're doing, what's happening at Foundry, you can follow us on all of our social media channels as well. Lastly, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of the studios, all the speakers who have participated so far with us in our virtual events. We've been doing this since March, and it has been such an incredible adventure and journey for all of us. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences, your stories with us. And we're looking forward to building up this even more. So that's it for me. Thank you again for joining. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Chris, who's going to be talking a little bit more about our latest release. Over to you, Chris.
Cheers, Joyce. Yeah, so big thank you and welcome to everyone in the chat. So I just want to quickly highlight some really cool stuff with Nuke Indie. We've introduced a new version of it, so Indie 12.2 v3. So this is meant for independent individual artists wanting to get a more affordable version of Nuke to work with. And with 12.2 v3, we're introducing support for H.264 AAC audio codecs, which brings Nuke Indie in line with all the formats supported by commercial Nuke Studio. In addition to this, we're also having third-party OFX plugins now enabled in Nuke Indie, and we're also working with developers of popular commercial NDK-based plugins to enable support for those in a future release. So really trying to keep rounding out the Nuke Indie experience for those that showed interest initially, but wanted to see a bit more. So hopefully that is some really good news for you. Joyce, if you could move to the next slide for me. Or can I control that? I can control that. Perfect. And the real reason you're here is that we've got an amazing webinar for you today. We have Josh Parks, who's a senior compositor at Important Looking Pirates. This is actually a really nice webinar for me to get to host because I actually worked with Josh many years ago at MPC. So it's fantastic to have him here. And Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, everyone. First of all, thank you for coming. It's kind of great, actually, seeing everyone in the chat. So and everywhere in the world. So if you woke up early for this, thank you so much. Thank you again. I'm Josh Parks. I'm a senior comper at Important Looking Pirates right now. Previously, ILM, DNEG, NBC, and a few other little companies. I've worked in advertising, TV, and film. And this is basically covering what some of the grading techniques and some of the math that I wish I knew when I started out. So I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, just before we start, just before we start the webinar, I do want to highlight to everyone in the chat, we have a questions tab that you can jump on over to, and at any time, you can ask a question there, and then at the end of Josh's talk, we'll be going through a bunch of them. So do please use the question tabs. You put the questions in the chat. You can see it scrolling past super fast, so we might not catch them. Whereas if you put them there, we'll make sure to try and get as many as we can. Okay, awesome. So I think we should really use the time as effectively as possible, Josh. And I think most people are really interested to hear what you wish you knew. So I'd recommend jumping into the talk.
Perfect. Sounds good. Enjoy, guys.
What I'm going to be covering with you guys today is how to get this monster sat into this plate really nicely and grade matched in. Now, the monster is being given to us by the guys that made the film Fallen Ember. So if you want to check out more of their stuff, you can search for their short film. And I'm going to be covering basically how to get this guy sat in, showing you a simple kind of process in order on what we're going to be looking for and what we're going to be trying to change to match it. I'm going to be giving you a way to magnify those changes so that you can really make those pinpoint little adjustments to make sure it is really, really sat in, so that you can really get it looking like it's kind of in a top-end film. I'm going to show you those techniques. I'm then going to show you a few other little tips that I wish I knew when I started out in the industry in regards to this kind of color grading CG. And then I'm then going to leave you with a final script in order for you to practice this going forwards. If you want any of these files, you can find them on my website, compositingpro.com/Nuke webinar. So I've read in our two files here. We've got the monster and we have our plate as well. Now you can find these on my website, compositingpro.com, if you fancy kind of having a go at doing this yourself. And I really would play around with these assets. They're pretty good assets, and they're just a really good thing to practice on. So let's have a look at our read node here. So we've got a red, green, blue, and alpha channel. And we've also got this little dark green box in the right-hand side here. So what does that dark green box actually mean? Well, what that is basically Nuke's bringing something in. There's something in this multi-layer EXR that Nuke doesn't recognize. It can't put it in a depth pass, or it's not a motion vector pass, for instance. So what we can do is if we go up here, you can see these are all the other channels we have in there. And that's what Nuke's referring to when it gives you that dark green box. Whenever you see it, there's some stuff in that EXR that Nuke doesn't quite recognize. So we could hit page up or page down to just flick through those and see those a little clearer to see exactly what we've got, which is okay, but there's a better way of doing it. The Foundry has given us a node. So if we write layer contact sheet here, like this, what we're going to get is it's now going to basically display all of the values there. So it's basically going to show us every single image shuffled out into RGB and put in this nice contact sheet. And there you go. So this is everything that's in this multi-layer EXR in those channels there. That's dark green. So that's fine, but Steven Spielberg might call you up at 2 in the morning and go, because he's in the US and I'm in Europe, so that's generally what happens, some stuff like that. So now we've got this kind of, like, let's say, okay, I want you to kind of change the color of this orange here. So you'd have to go through, page down, okay, let's see what passed that in. Well, we've got the layer contact sheet, which is great, but we need to see now the kind of label behind it, right? We want to know, okay, what is the actual pass called? So if we hit show layer names here, and I'm just going to bring this up a little bit, you'll be able to see here that now we can see, okay, look, I need to change the RGBA light group 3. So we can go here, RGBA light group 3, and there you go. Now you can see that information. Okay, that's the channel I need to change. Now, I'm not really going to be covering how to change channels today. I'm going to be covering the general kind of grading and matching into a plate, just the first kind of step in regards to that. But that's how you basically do that. And now you can see that you've the pass that you want to change, and you can now go in and change that. So when it comes to grading, let's merge these two guys together. So there we go. There we've got our monster there, and he's over the top. And we just need to do a little bit of setup basically before we can actually start grading this in. So let's have a look at our monster again. Now, what we can see, first of all, our formats are slightly different, as you can see, so we'd probably want to put a little reformat in there, just so they're now the same format. There we go. And you can see on the edges here that we've got this kind of, you can see it's bright, or actually let's bring this down. So you can see here that it's this kind of grey colour here, and it's slowly that grey colour gets dark towards the edges. Now, in the real world, that does not happen, right? You don't look at a tree and go, oh look, the edges get darker the closer they are towards that edge. The brown colour doesn't slowly get darker towards the edge, right, on a tree. And that's the same with everything in the real world. So what is that? Well, that's basically an aliased edge, and that's just to help this guy sit into the plate a little better, basically. Now, because of this, when it comes to grading, Nuke's going to think that, well, come back to my analogy with that dark tree towards the edges, Nuke's going to think that this monster here gets dark towards the edges. But that isn't the case at all. So we just need to undo that aliased edge before we start grading this. So let's throw in an unpre-multiply node. And you can see now, wow, okay, look, that's how the real world is, right? Like, it's exactly the same color as it gets towards that edge. That's how things are in the real world. And it looks pretty jaggedy and crude, but again, that's how it would be in the real world. That's what those colors would be. Now, what the unpre-multiply is doing, for those of you that don't know, is it's basically just doing this value, the red value, divided by the alpha. Then it goes to the green divided by the alpha and the blue divided by alpha. And when it does the red divided by the alpha, it then takes that result and puts it in the red channel. So you can see that these numbers change here. And that's because this is the result of that dividing, this number here. And it does that for every single pixel. So it just goes along and does it for every single pixel. So let's do a bit of this. So, because I might be lying to you now, so let's prove it with a calculator. So let's view this, and we're going to work out what this pixel will be when it gets that unpre-multiply. So you can see it goes to that value. So what is it doing? Well, let's put the value in. So we're going to do 0.05170 divided by 0.26840. And what that is this value divided by the alpha value. Let's click this, equals 0.1926. 0.1926, and then we've maybe got it. Maybe there's like some values after here that we haven't got in there, but that's pretty close, right? So that is what it's doing under the hood. It's just doing that, and then it's doing the same for the green, and then it's doing the same for the blue. So that's all the unpre-multiply is doing. Now, for those of you that don't know what the pre-mult does, is does the opposite. So what's the opposite of a divide? Well, it's a multiply. So let's do the same thing. Let's pick the green value this time, and we're going to do 0.18876, and this is while viewing the unpre-multiply node, and multiply that by 0.26840. 0.05, 0.05. So that's all those are doing under the hood. One is doing a divided by the alpha, and one is doing a multiplied by the alpha. Now we've got our image unpre-multiplied. If you guys wanted to muck around with your passes at all, the problem we have right now is it's great. Okay, we've unpre-multiplied by this, but if we go here, you can see we still have the aliased edge on all the passes in the image. So why is that? Well, at the moment what we've done is we've told Nuke to, okay, I want you to divide the RGB values by the alpha. Well, that's not what we want. We want to divide everything by the alpha. And there you go. Now all of these passes will be divided by the alpha. So there you go. That's always important to make sure if you're going to be playing around with those passes, or whenever you see that dark green box, I would always set that to all, just to make sure you're unpre-multiplying everything and getting it in there. So now we've got that, we just want to now finish off our setup so we can start grading. We're going to put a copy node in, and the reason why we do this is we want to copy in the original alpha from up here. And the reason why you do this is because you don't want to muck up the alpha. We're going to in a minute do some grading here and some kind of like adjusting around, and you don't want to accidentally screw up the alpha channel, which then screws up your edges and everything. So this is just a really great way to kind of idiot-proof yourself, and let's say you've been doing some long hours and you forget something. Okay, now you can't screw up that alpha. So then what we need to do is we then just need to pre-multiply that to then apply that cutout back over. So to apply that kind of nice alias edge, apply the alpha to the image. And the great way as well, by the way, so let's have a look at this. So as I was saying earlier, how the pre-multiply actually multiplies the color channel by your alpha. Well, that's the reason, by the way, that all these values here don't change when we're pre-multiplying, because anything multiplied by 1 stays the same, and anything multiplied by 0 ends up at 0. So that's why these values stay the same, and all the fun stuff happens on the edges. And the reason why these get darker is because anything multiplied by something less than 1 is always going to bring the value down. So if you multiply something by 0.5, it's going to halve the value, which is close to 0, therefore it gets close to black. So there you go. That's basically the setup and how we're going to be, what we're going to be using in our future lesson to grade this guy. Now we have our setup done, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be diving into that grading. But first what we want to do is we want to exaggerate the colors and exaggerate the brightness and exaggerate the dark areas in order to just help us match this stuff. So what we can do is put a little dot node in at the bottom here. And I'm going to make 3 nodes. So first we're going to make a saturation node. And if I hold down shift, select this dot node and hit Y, it will automatically connect that up for me. That's a really great trick. If you have a big script, to save you kind of like dragging this guy all the way up like this, which is what I used to do before I knew that. Just select this, hold down shift, select that, and hit Y. Put a grade node in. And we're then going to put another grade node in. So I'm hitting G on the keyboard with my cursor in the node graph here, shift selecting this and hitting Y to connect that up. So you might be wondering, why we put these in? Well, think of these as kind of a microscope. At the moment, we're viewing this image and we might be able to see some values that we need to change, but it'd be really great if we could exaggerate this stuff. A little like looking under a microscope, it's exaggerating all the movement, right? It's exaggerating the size, everything. And we need to do the same. So this is going to be exaggerating the color. So if I bring this up, you can start seeing how kind of warm this guy is compared to the surrounding values, like the values in the plate. Let's go to our grade. We're going to put 5 or 4 or 5 in the gain. And now this allows me to see those shadows. So you can see how dark this is compared to here, right? You can really see that. It really exaggerates it. And then this one here, we're just going to bring this all the way down to allow us to see the highlights. And you can see, if you kind of, this might be hard to do on the recording, but you can see here how this is fairly bright compared to here. It's a little brighter than this. And you might hear a lot. Now, when I was studying this stuff at university, I remember hearing like, oh, just match to the plate. And it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense because, like, yeah, that makes sense because I'm trying to sit this into the plate. But what does that actually mean? Well, you always want to be matching the colors to the plate, right? So like, okay, look, this guy's a bit blue here, so he needs to be a bit bluer. And this is what they mean by matching to the plate. You always have to refer to a material or something in the plate. So for instance, down here, we have shiny rocks. This guy, this monster's maybe like a wood material. So the wood is probably going to be less shiny than those rocks. Therefore, I would expect this guy to be less bright than the rocks. Okay, now we have a look here. Okay, so what color is this wood's texture? Am I expecting it to kind of be browner than the belt he's wearing, for instance, or this bit here? If he's browner than here, then he needs to kind of match this color and then get a little bit more brown. Like, do you see what I mean? So you always have to be having something as reference to your plate in everything you do. And that's just going to really help you. Your comps will get way better if you start doing that. And you have to treat every single shot like its own thing, because in one shot, for instance, this material here might be a little bit more tinted purple. So therefore you need to tint your monster a little bit more purple in order to match it closer to that sleeve or something. So once we've got these exaggerated, now we can start going in and actually doing our grading. So some of you might instinctively kind of go towards a color correct node. So if I'm honest with you, most of the high-end places we don't really use color corrects. The reason why is because, number one, we have a contrast slider here. I've got no idea what that contrast slider does. In my world, gamma is your contrast. So I'm not quite sure what that contrast does. For me, like, there's no colorist ever that's got a contrast slider. It's always kind of lift, gamma, gain. And the second reason why as well is these ranges here. So for those of you that don't know, the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights here, what they're doing when you drag these sliders is they're only affecting the values that fall into this area. So you can see here, this is your highlights. These are all the values that are going to be just in your highlights. These are all the values in this box here, sorry, this big box, that are going to be affected by your midtones. And these are the values that are going to be affected by your shadows. And you can adjust these as you see fit to play around with that, so you can really kind of finesse what you're grading. But for me, this is very similar to a Luma key. Like, I would just key the areas you want to grade. If this was the case, you'd Luma key it. And the problem as well is you can really break the relationship between values if you start kind of like whacking up the contrast of your highlights and then whacking up the saturation of your midtones. That can really screw up your relationship between all these values and give you some very weird results. If your lighting is fairly good, and even if it isn't actually that great, I would always stick to grade nodes, because it's just it's going to make way more sense, and you can really see then exactly what you're selecting to grade, rather than kind of these here under the hood. Just throw some Luma keys in if you need to adjust the midtones or the highlights. So there you go. I personally wouldn't be using a color correct. So with that in mind, we're going to be using a grade today. So for those of you that have used grades before, you might expect me now to kind of like, okay, select my black point, let's go here, and then we go into our plate, and then we'd maybe select our lift and sample here, and then you get these people kind of expecting that to then sit in. Now I've kind of rushed that. No, I haven't done that properly, obviously, but that's never going to work. Basically, that's never going to make this guy sit in. And the reason why is because there's way more stuff happening in there than just black point and white point matching. There's contrast values, there's the warmth in the highlights, or maybe the coolness in the highlights, and there's matching your black values exactly to certain areas. For instance, some of these areas may not need to be that dark or that bright in the black values. And the other thing as well is the problem with this, the main problem with this, if I'm honest with you, is if I sample a black point, which let's say it's this one here, and then I sample a lift, every single value that's underneath this value I've just sampled will now be clamped at 0. So what happens is you're basically losing information now if you do it this way, because you can see the grade node by default has a black clamp on. If that isn't on, now your values that are kind of hit with that black point will basically now go to negative values, as you can see. The minute I do this, now they'll end up at 0. But now what you've just done is you just clamped off all this detail. So unless you really pick the very, very, very smallest value in your whole image, which you could do, then it's just going to completely clamp off some nice details that you may get. And your CG may be incredibly underlit, which means, well, let's say you clamped it and then you feel like, oh wow, I need to brighten this guy up. Now you're going to end up with this kind of obvious banding because you've just clamped a load of values that should be brought up. So hopefully that makes sense into, number one, why I wouldn't use color corrects. Number two, why I wouldn't do the whole kind of like black point sample, then lift, and white point sample, then gain. So in the next video, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you exactly what I would be doing in order to match this into our plate. I've shown you how not to do it. I've attacked some color corrects, and I've attacked kind of the lifting and the white point and the black point. So how would we do it? How should we actually do this? Well, let's put a grade node in. Let's start actually sitting this guy in. First of all, when I'm matching something to a plate, I always want to match the contrast. Now, other people may have different ways of doing it. I'm just going to kind of show you my method that seems to work for me. So you always want to match your contrast. Now, what is contrast? Well, contrast is just the relationship between your brightest value and your darkest value. Now, if I put these in, you can see that the monster is kind of fairly contrasting. See, this is the brightest value and this is the darkest value. This is the darkest value, and you can see that bright and dark are further apart, I'd say, than this bright and dark, right? They feel kind of closer together, these two, than these two. So first of all, we need to remove that contrast or have less contrast in our CG. So what we're going to do is gamma is your contrast. What you'll generally hear is if you need to reduce the contrast of something, you'd gamma down, and you can see it gets darker there, and you would then gain up. So that's generally what you'll hear. So you have to kind of, all of these settings I'm going to show you today will always adjust something else. So you kind of, it's a balance snap between all of them. And if you want to reduce the contrast in this, as we do, we'd gamma up, and it's going to get brighter and less contrasty, as you can see. This is very contrasty. Gamma up just a little bit, and then gain down. And what I'm doing when I'm gaining down is I'm just trying to kind of sit the brightness in again. So let's gamma up a little bit more. And what I'm trying to do is just get it so that it's feeling like the relationship between these is a little better. So let's turn this on and off. And you can see that starts feeling like the contrast is closer, right? You can see instantly, by the way, if you reduce the contrast on something, it will push it back in depth. You can see the minute I do that, it's now pushed back in depth. It feels like it's kind of sat in there. Whereas before it feels like it's almost popping out the mounting. And now it's sat back in there. Now again, I might need to adjust that later on, but for now, that's good enough. That's good enough for a first pass. Then what I do is, next up I like to do kind of the highlights. Your highlights is your gain. So if ever you need to adjust the brightness of something, that's your gain. That's this one here. So let's go in and have a look at that. So what I could do is, okay, I could kind of play around with it here, but even better, let's look at our really dark one. And we can even go a bit darker, and we can view this, okay? And as I was saying earlier, like, this is a shiny path here. So should this be brighter than here? I actually think it should be. If this was kind of like a wet kind of mountain, as I think it looks like, then I actually think it should be kind of shinier than here and a little bit brighter. So let's have a look then at that grade. And you can see I can barely see these two things. So this might be quite tricky depending on the screen you're on, but hopefully you can see that this is just a touch kind of brighter than here, but I want it to just exaggerate that a little bit. So I'm going to bring the gain down ever so slightly and go in and view that. Okay, that feels quite nice. That feels pretty good for me. That feels pretty good. I mean, I may want to bring it up just a little bit in case he feels like he's almost kind of too sat into that mountain, but that feels pretty good. So next up, once you feel like you're in the right general ballpark of these, it's your black levels. And to do black levels, some people would go for the lift here. I quite like using the toe. Now, what the toe's actually doing under the hood is, let me draw a little graph for you here. That's basically your color graph. And this is the toe, and this is the shoulder. What the toe's going to do is it's basically, as I drag this slider up, it will then start bringing up these black values like this to put them about here. So it's only going to adjust this part of our image, which is the toe. Some companies I've been at have a node called a shoulder node, which is just to adjust these kind of highlights bits. But there you go. The lift is okay. I just personally prefer using the toe. And I picked this up when I was at ILM. I was using the lift before, and they kind of used the toe, and it was just a really nice way of doing it. It just gives you a bit more control. So what we're going to do is I'm going to control click here, and this is going to give us this pop-up. If you've never clicked that before, you're probably going to see it like this. I would turn on HSV and TMI, because TMI is the thing that we always want to be using. It allows us to add warmth to make it a bit cooler, and to add magenta or green, and then we can then adjust the overall brightness here. So these are the general slides you want to be. I've never really had a note of, hey, I want you to make the shadows a bit more red. It's always warmer, cooler, if I'm honest with you. So this gives you a slide that's like, okay, if it's warmer, okay, I just drag it that way. It's nice and simple. So let's view this saturation node. And first of all, we need to get the brightness right. So we're going to bring this up, and I'm going to get that in the general ballpark. And then we're going to put some color into it. So then we're going to start putting a bit of blue in. And you can see there that really helps. Now, the problem we got is our contrast isn't right. Can you see how well, the minute I do this, it's really crushing everything. Can you see? And this is the problem, by the way, with when you set your blacks. You can see sometimes it's going to kind of like crush everything and you lose all this detail. That's probably because this is a bit too high. So if you ever feel like that, that's probably just because you need to reduce the contrast a little bit more. And then we're going to then have to adjust our brightness down again, like this. So let's start bringing that back again. Let's turn that on, first of all. And you can see now we're having to kind of hit it less to get to that part. So we're just going to bring this in. Now, I actually don't mind this being a little bit darker than here, because maybe that tree is actually a little darker in these certain areas. So that's absolutely fine. Again, this is probably my value I need to match to. And we can bring this up a little bit. And you can see now if I turn these on and off, that's matching way closer. Now, I think maybe I've gone a little too over the board with the purple. So let's just ease off on that. Maybe I've gone a little bit too overboard on the orange there. And maybe actually, you know what, I might want to put a touch of warmth in there, because again, that mountain maybe is a little bit cooler than this monster, which is kind of wood or warm bark. So we'd maybe be able to just affect and add just a touch more warmth in there. And you can see how that really helps sit this guy in there, right? You can see he's really kind of like sitting in, and that's really helping him feel like he's in there, and he's now got those values matching. And again, you might want to just adjust that ever so slightly if you feel like it needs it, but we're in the general ballpark now. So let's view this. And then you can see, there we go, there's our monster that has been sat in to the plate. Now, for me personally, once you've done these changes of getting it roughly in there, now you can start thinking creatively. So for instance, in a shot like this, okay, I want people to be looking here, so I might go a touch brighter on his head. In that case, I'd maybe just want to add a touch of contrast back and just bring that up ever so slightly in there, just to kind of help him pop out just a little bit from the mountain. You can see now he's not popping out quite so much. But if I turn these on and off, you can see before, this guy really stood out. Like the black level's going to feel wrong, his head's going to feel way too bright, and now, okay, now he's nicely sat in that image. Now, if you felt like, okay, that's okay, but I want him to actually be a little bit warmer, so he really pops out even further, let's hit Control in our gain and the color wheel, and that's going to pop out this same thing. So as I was saying earlier, you want to match to the plate. So for instance, you can see this is kind of like a warm leather, it looks like a dark orangey brown leather. Same with his belt, and his hair is kind of a reddy color. So I can use that to maybe as a reference. So for instance, let's go back to our saturation, and you can see how kind of green this guy is, right, compared to here. So let's add a little bit of purple in, and then add a little bit of warmth in. And you can see he starts feeling like he's a bit closer towards this. And let's view that. And there you go. Now we've got it so that he's kind of no longer that blue color, but he's kind of feeling more warm. And again, you could totally adjust this afterwards, by the way, if you feel like when you're viewing through the saturation, I think it's matching, but when you're viewing here, you still feel like it needs a bit of adjustment, then feel free to kind of go in there and really adjust this stuff. The saturation is just a great way to get you closer to what you should be doing. It's kind of, I love it because you can't, it's very hard for you to kind of muck up here. It's kind of nice and easy. Okay, look, that clearly isn't matching that color, and that's clearly a bit more blue, so maybe we'd pump a bit more blue in. But it just makes it nice and easy because you look at this now and it's like, it looks black and white, right? So there you go. Now we've got this guy sat in to that plate. So what I'd love to finish off with is a few little details in regard to the math that's happening in the grade node. So if we have a look at this, you could see here that I was kind of adding some color in here, and then I was leaving everything else the same. I was just adding the color in this bit. What you'd maybe want to do, a kind of a better way of doing this, and I'm going to just bring this over like this again, is to actually, now let's just get this in the general ballpark. And you can see here that I'm dragging that gain down to get it back there. Now before, what we did is we added our color in here, and that's fine. Let's say we've graded that in to match that. Now what if someone says, okay, that's fine, but I now want him to be half as bright, let's say. Well, the problem is half as bright would basically mean you'd have to half this value, and this value. And that's okay. That you could totally do that. You could maybe do a calculator or add an expression or something to be able to do that. But there's a better way. And what you can do is actually just set this multiplier to 0.5, and there you go. Now you're going to have half the brightness in that image. You're going to actually have done that math there. And I can prove it to you. So I'm going to put a grade node in, plug it into our plate, and I'm going to set the gain here, let's do this, to, let's set this one to 3. Perfect. Now I'm going to put another grade node in, and I'm going to set the gain to 6 and the multiplier to 0.5. And these two images will look exactly the same, as you can see. So why do they look exactly the same? Well, it's basically because the gain and the multiply are doing exactly the same thing. This is doing a multiply, and this is doing a multiply. So for instance, let's put another grade in. If I set the gain to 2, it's just going to, if I sample this value, you can see that this is doubled. That's all it's doing. If I put 4 in, it'll be multiplied by 4. That's all that's doing. Same with the multiply here. If I put 2 in there, it's going to do exactly the same thing. But I can prove it to you. Put 2 in the gain instead. So we have a node here, 2 in the gain, node here, 2 in the multiply. They look exactly the same. So they're doing the exact same thing. So why is it that the Foundry have done that, right? That seems really bizarre. Well, it's actually because how this works is the grade node works down. So if I put a number in the black point, it now does that math and then moves to the white point. Then does that math, moves to the lift, does that math, moves to the gain, does that math, moves to the multiply. So it's not kind of hitting it all with the grade node at the same time. It's actually working down in this order. So what you can do, and the general kind of practice that I like to use, is I like to add my color to the gain, and then I use my multiply to adjust the brightness. So again, so we can do that, we can add our color, and then use the multiply then to just dial in your brightness if you feel the need to. And that's just a really great way to do things and keep things separated. Because now if you do get a note of, hey, I want it to be 20% less bright, then you can just, I mean, if you really want to do this, you can just add an expression, and then you can do 0.9 multiplied by 0.8, right? And then that's going to give you 20% of that number. And there you go. So that would give you it exactly. And now you can still adjust your values here. I'd maybe want to turn that off, but you can now adjust your values here in regards to your color. And you can see here, I can just flick around my color, and then we can then adjust our multiply here. So there you go. One other trick I'd like to show you is in regards to the contrast. So what you'll see is as we gamma down and gain up here, not only is the contrast increasing, but you can actually see that the saturation is kind of increasing. So you can see, wow, look, that's getting way more green, and wow, these are getting way more blue. And you may not want that. It's a real issue if you feel like you've sat in something into a plate, let's say this guy, and you're like, wow, okay, now I need to add some contrast. So you maybe throw another grade in, adjust the gamma there, and wow, okay, look, now the colors are really popping that I just matched. Well, what we can do is we can actually use a different color space in order to help us out with this. So let's put a color space node in, and we've got linear in, and we're going to then flick to HSV. And now your image goes in a sort of like crazy disco mode, which might be a look, who knows, maybe the client loves that, but not for this image. Now it's not going to really sit in. So what is this? Well, this color space in the red channel is putting the hue. So if I hit R, this is the hue. So what color is each value? In the green is putting the saturation, so how colorful is each value, is each pixel. And in the blue is putting how bright is each value, so that's the value, and it's just how bright it is. Now think about it, when it comes to contrast, we basically just want to adjust the brightness. Like we want to adjust the contrast in the brightness, not the hue. Like we don't want to exaggerate the contrast in the hue or saturation. So what we can do is once we're in this color space, we can select our grade node that's adjusting our contrast, turn off red and turn off green. And now we're just adjusting that brightness. And then we put another color space node in. In fact, actually we could just copy this one, paste it underneath and do swap in and out. And now if I grab another grade node to the side, just so we've got a bit of a comparison here. Actually, you know what? I can literally just grab this. You should see that if I view this one, the image is getting a bit contrasty. Let's brighten up so it's a bit of a fair example. See, this is getting a bit contrasty, but it's also the values are getting more saturated. If I view this one, it's getting brighter, but my values aren't getting more saturated now. If I view the original to here, okay, that feels kind of pretty close. Yes, it's getting brighter and a bit more contrasty. If I view this one and view here, wow, okay, it's getting brighter and it's getting more saturated and it's getting more contrasty. Like it just isn't right. Like, and this is the problem you'll have. You'll sometimes see people kind of doing this, and then they'll throw like a saturation in to ease off of the saturation that contrast is giving you. But you don't need to do it. All you're going to do is flick to HSV, contrast or gamma, just the blue channel there, and then flick back again. And now you're in a really nice space where if you really want to go nuts with this, now you can end up, and it's fine. Like you're not going to blow out the colors. Whereas if you were to do that here, the minute you do this, you're going to start really, as you can see, like the colors just go nuts on it. So that is another little quick trick whenever you're doing color grading. Something I wanted to leave you with is a setup that I like to give to the students that I teach one-on-one online. And what I get them to do is I basically get them to do this about 4 or 5 times a day for around 2 weeks, just to make sure they're really kind of practicing and getting their eye in, so they can start really spotting this stuff. Now, what we got is a mountain range image here, and you can see we've just taken our monster and we've got 3 of them in there. We've got 1 in the foreground, 1 in the midground, and 1 in the background. And you can see back here, the contrast is fairly different compared to here. The brightness is different. The grading in regards to the color is different of these mountains. So this is a really great way to practice, basically, because you're taking the same asset and you've got to set it into various different things to make it look like it's actually sat into these different depths. So this is all on my website, which is compositingpro.com. If you do /Nuke webinar, you'll be able to download the script there. And again, this is a great way to practice. I would then swap in this background for other backgrounds, maybe another mountain, maybe a forest, etc., and just really get practicing matching that contrast, matching that brightness, So what I'm going to be covering with you guys today is how to get this.
Ooh. Unfortunately, it looked like it might have cut off a little bit of the end there, Josh.
Oh man, It's okay. Well, if anyone's got any questions about the dramatic ending, we'll do a part 2.
Well, I mean, do you remember what you were going to say? You could try and answer.
I was literally about to teach everyone how to use the auto composite button in Nuke. So unfortunately, like that, and that would have wiped everything out that you needed to know. But I mean, if I'm honest with you, it would have just been a case of like practicing comping that CG into loads of different backgrounds. I think as long as you understand that, then you're good. So yeah, so I would grab that Nuke script and just start practicing it. So yeah,
that was a really great talk. It was really nice to see how to approach grading from. I know for me, from some new perspectives, there's things that I learned when I was beginning doing the comp work and how I'd grade, and it was very much just put it into the red channel, put it into the green channel, and just try to match grayscale to grayscale. It was kind of like doing, whereas it felt like there was a lot more arsenal in the toolkit there to be able to workflow.
The thing is, I think the reason why this is called like what I wish I knew is because when I started out in the industry, people are just telling you to match the bloody plate. And it's like, okay, that, of course, I get that. I get that it's going to look like it's in there. But you basically need like a step, right? You need to go through a set of steps and to know then, okay, if I just follow this, it'll work. And that's what that was. So hopefully you guys found that useful, because that's literally like the mental checklist I use whenever I'm setting something in. And that is honestly like, that and keying skills are like two of the most fundamental things. It doesn't matter if you know deep, if you can't grade in your stuff into a plate, it doesn't matter. Like that's the fundamental stuff of being a comper. So
have you built similar skills for the different workflows for things like keying, for things like tracking there, where you follow a process that you sort of just picked up as you've gone along learning from other artists?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, that's the advantage of being in the industry, right? You can kind of steal your ideas from the best people and then just grab what works and then try them out. And I think that's the intimidating thing when you start off, because there's so many different techniques. You don't know which ones are right and wrong. So this was all about kind of like giving some checklists. And yes, I do like keying, for instance, is always, I really love additive keying, and that's like my go-to. So with keying, I always make like the perfect clean plate I possibly can. And then that just then makes everything super easy. Now, that's not necessarily saying that's the right way of doing it, but it's just, you need a process. Otherwise, you can go nuts with it, right? There's so many different ways of doing stuff in Nuke, as you know.
Yes.
You need to have like a mental process of how to deal with stuff.
I definitely agree a process is really important. Do you ever find, though, that maybe you get locked into a process and there might be a better way to solve it? Like, how do you make sure you're not trapping yourself into only ever exploring one solution?
That's very true. Well, you do that because, so it's all about systems. So you got to like, so I started out NPC and I used to go in half an hour every morning. Well, we both started out NPC, but I used to basically go in like 30 minutes early and just look at other people's Nuke scripts. And I still do that now. Like I literally, because the great thing is, if you're working on a sequence of shots, most of the shots are kind of going to be similar, especially in TV. So you can see how each person's tackled that problem. So I'm constantly like importing other people's scripts in to see how they've done something. But you're right. Like, so I really hate edge extends, for instance. I really hate them. And today I was dealing with some tech fixes, and I could probably have edge extended it. We'd done it. It would have fixed it in 10 minutes, actually. But I just can't use them. But anyway, you're right. Like, you definitely can get stuck in your ways, and most artists will. And it's important to kind of, I try to come up with systems to make sure I don't, basically. Otherwise, you kind of stop learning once you can do stuff.
Okay, cool. We actually got through that much faster than I thought it was. So we only have 15 minutes to go through a lot of the great questions that people have asked. So we won't be able to answer all of them. We've tried to answer a number of them in chat already, but we'll get through as many as we can. So Josh, if you can be an absolute legend and answer them as quick but as quickly as possible.
Let's do it.
But yeah, give good answers. Don't you have to rush them. Okay, so we've got this question from Vishku. Massive fan of your work, Josh. Thanks for doing the webinar. Just wondering, what excites you about the future of VFX?
Whoa. That's a good one. Right now, it's kind of interesting because with COVID and stuff, people are coming up with all sorts of like unique ways of shooting stuff in coronavirus times. So that it's quite interesting seeing all of the different ways people are doing it. I mean, things that excite me are machine learning and how that could be useful in visual effects. That's very interesting. A completely different way of doing things. I mean, you've seen like the face swaps and things people are doing, but it gets even more. You can kind of do a lot of stuff with it. So that's one. And then obviously the virtual production is another. and kind of seeing how that's being used and maybe how clients deal with not being able to change their backgrounds after they've shot it. That's going to be interesting, right? Like when they want to change something, it's like, well, you didn't shoot it on the green screen, you're locked in. So that's really, and also coming back to that, it's kind of like now compositors, I know I've got friends who are compers on films, and they're now at the start of the process. Often compositors are at the end of the process, but they're at the start grading and comping the stuff that's going to be on the monitors. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But in short, machine learning and virtual production, and then maybe a bit of games engine stuff in there as well. I want you guys to put a games engine in Nuke. That's like that's what I'd love you guys to do next.
You and a number of other people, and we would love it as well. But that is a big task and one that we are not shying away from, but one that will require.
It's not just as simple as emailing Unreal.
When it comes to the machine learning, actually, I thought common thing I see in response to that is people curious about how it'll affect the actual jobs that a compositing artist does. How do you feel about that with machine learning? Do you think it'll impact you in a way whereby you'll do less, or there'll be less work available for you, or do you think it'll be a different kind of work?
I see. This is the thing. So the interesting thing is, if you think about it, I would say, well, definitely, compositing software is way better now than it was 30 years ago, right? Now, are there any like less jobs in the industry now? I'd argue no. I mean, right now, maybe yes. I'll give you that. But let's go back a year ago. Like I would argue there's probably more compositing jobs in the industry than there were 30 years ago. But the technology's got better. So I would argue that I don't think it's just going to be another tool. It's literally just going to be another tool. It's like saying, hey, look, they've invented this, like they've invented a blender to chop food different. Are there going to be any less chefs now? No, there's not. It's just, they're just going to use the tool and use it in a different way.
Yeah, I definitely feel like machine learning is going to be another aid and tool to artists. You might be able to do things quicker, but it will still always require an artist's touch to really get that quality. A machine will take a lot of time to ever get to that point.
Exactly. And if you can get to a good point quicker, then the standard just goes up. That's what increases the standard, right? Like they just expect better work, which means you have to put the same amount of time in, but it just looks better.
It's the same render problem of like, as GPUs and everything get better, things will be faster on the render farm. It's like, no, the render farm will always take overnight because you'll always push more on it.
Exactly. Exactly that.
Okay, we've got a really nice question from Carolis. Apologies if I mispronounced your name. What's the comp's relationship with a lighting artist, and how much comp would you want a lighter to know to make your life easier?
Oh my God. Oh, well, I don't know if people know this, but when I was at NPC, Chris was actually a lighter there as well. And we were good friends, right? And that wasn't just because I wanted good stuff out of Chris. It was because we actually got on. But saying that, I mean, I think it's, as a compositor, it's incredibly important to have a good relationship with the lighter, because you need to be like bouncing ideas off them and saying, hey, look, you know what? Don't worry about this. I can do this bit in comp. And it's kind of like a give and take thing, right? And then you could go, hey, look, you know what? Can you kick out these passes and do this in lighting? Because it's going to be a pain for me to do. I mean, how about you? Like, what would you want a compositor to act like when you were lighting?
I think from the lighting side, it was always important to know how much, because as a lighting artist, I have to put together slap comps and make sure that, we could preview the work I'm doing. But it was to make sure that the comps I put together were representative of the actual renders. And so that when I'm passing it on to comp, they actually have something that is reflective. Comp, as a lighting artist, will change your work. It will just always that's because they're being directed to do something different, and that's fine. So as a lighting artist, you just want to understand what passes will your compositing artist need for each shot, making sure that's all relevant, and just giving the best flexibility so that they can do their job to the best.
Definitely. I think actually coming back to when I was in advertising, you're literally in the room with your lighter, and it was great because you'd just be like bouncing ideas off each other, like, hey, can you put that light there? And you'd go have a look, and then you'd kind of work out what you could do between you. So, I mean, it's incredibly important to have a relationship with the guys who are lighting your shots.
Just to finish up with this one and to make it a bit more succinct. So as a lighting artist, make sure you just know how to do the basic comp stuff. So how to put together your lighting passes accurately. So making sure you're using the right merge operations when combining like your diffuse, your raw, your global illumination, all that. And then, as long as you know that kind of stuff, you're fine.
Please don't put chromatic aberration in your light and slaps as well. Like, and grain. Please don't do that.
Okay, we have another question here from Sarah. Again, if I mispronounce your name, I'm really sorry. How important will keying become in the future since we've seen the introduction of LED walls replacing green screens?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's all done for us, right? But again, it's kind of going to be more down to the relationship that, like, is the client okay with taking what they have on set? Sorry, what were you going to say, Chris?
I heard that because Mandalorian is obviously the best example of this, or one of the best examples. But I heard that there was a lot of edge issues, even with the LED walls that had to be fixed in post anyway.
I mean, there used to be issues where you could see the individual LEDs, and they'd put, like, on Star Wars, they were putting like diffusal sheets kind of over it because you could actually see the individual ones when you got close up to it. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me that you have to do something like that. But if you knew the pattern, I'd imagine there's a procedural way of getting rid of it, potentially. I don't know. Again, I think it's still going to be important to be able to key. I'm still waiting to be able to key in depth. That's going to be the dream. When you've got a camera and you can key in Z depth, which we were trying out on The Martian because it was a stereo show. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important. I also think it's important to note that while LED walls will definitely become more prevalent on big shows, there's a number of projects and shows that will never have access to that, or won't have access to that technology for a while. Or there'll be big shows where using that technology won't be the most practical or cost-efficient way to work on the set. So you'll always need a green screen in that instance then for the kind of work you're doing. So I don't think it's a skill that you should throw to the wayside. I think you should be good at it.
Yeah. Well, and also there's only going to be a certain amount of those facilities to do it. So as you said, like, there's only going to be a certain amount of productions that actually can have the ability to work on those. So yeah, you're definitely going to need to do green screen keying, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Okay, let's see what else we've got. Okay, we've got an interesting one here from Panagiotis. For people who haven't worked with footage from Red or Ari, for example, what's the process of finding out the correct color space based on how something was filmed, and provided that no one actually gave you that information beforehand?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, metadata. That's when you just hope you put a Nuke view metadata node and hope that in the image sequence it's all in there. If it isn't, then you kind of take a stab at what you think it was shot on. But I would always email, like, color. If you get color space wrong, it screws you up. It has kind of like exponential issues down the line. So I would be sending emails to everyone and making sure they understand how important it is. And also, worst case scenario, view metadata is the thing to do. Or even what I've had to do before in ads is find photos that were shot on set to try and see what camera was being used. Maybe there's witness cams or something you can see. But yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this one becomes more of a find the information from outside of Nuke where you can, because you're going to achieve that process faster than trying to guess your way there in Nuke.
And don't guess, please don't guess your way. It's going to lead to a whole lot of problems when you send that file back to them. Yeah, it's not going to be good. Oh, no, we've actually got someone in the chat, Richard Smith, that said he worked in The Mandalorian and they had to rotor some of the characters out of the LED screens because the director changed their mind. There you go.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome to hear. And awesome work, by the way. Mandalorian was such a cool show.
I mean, they didn't have an excuse because the guy's basically wearing a big chrome ball, right? So if that was green screen, it's not a fun place to be.
Okay, so from Bebe, how many tracker feature points are used in tracking? Are there different methods for using tracking? Now, I think tracking is such a big topic, we really won't be able to answer this in the 5 minutes, but yes, there's different methods of tracking. There's point and there's camera tracking, and you can use many different. I would recommend, if people in chat would mind sharing some good tutorials on tracking workflows, that would be really useful here. Anything you'd like to add quickly though, Josh?
I can't track at all because we have a whole match move department. So I just put 300 in the features and hit auto track and hope for the best.
Just 300? I think that's...
I did. Oh, wow. Maybe I need to up it now. That was a few years ago. Yeah, that's the one thing that I've never had to do. So unfortunately, I don't kind of dive into that too much.
Yeah, I would love to give you more information right now, but I really don't think we'll be able to give you something substantial. But I will say there's a lot of fantastic resources out there already on tracking. Josh, I believe you actually have know of a good website that has good recommendations for tutorials?
Yeah, maybe I should use it to learn how to do tracking, right? So, me and some friends, we basically set up a website so that if we find good free tutorials that are kind of industry standard, they're not kind of this weird, odd stuff that's just teaching wrong stuff. It's nukecompositingtutorials.com. And it'll then we've got it kind of so we just tag everything. So you can have a look there and see if there's any kind of like match movie stuff. But yeah, if you're wanting to find tutorials that are free, we're putting the good ones we find up there. So yeah, it's worth maybe checking out if you want to.
Great. I can't actually share this question to the screen, I don't think, because you answered it inside the question tab. But when did you use a color correct, if ever?
Yeah, I don't use color corrects at all. And most people I've noticed when I was at DNEG NPC in Ireland, we didn't use color corrects. We just use a grade node with a keyer. It's just exactly the same thing. And it shows everyone as well what you've done. So the reason why is because you want to be showing, when someone opens up your Nuke script, you want them to be able to see what you've done. And if all your keys under the hood in that color correct ranges tab, they can't see what you're changing. So yeah, I'd always suggest going in and just using a keyer with a grade.
Great. Okay, we've got one from Noah. What's your process if there is a lens flare or other imperfection plate that should be obstructing the CG?
Yeah, so you basically, I mean, you basically just have to remake it using optical flares or Nuke's inbuilt flare node. Try and remake the flare and then have it lining up and put it over your CG. I mean, you can try and road it off the plate, but you're always going to get the background contaminating. Maybe you could try and do a difference matte as well if the flare's moving, and maybe you could try and do a difference, make a clean plate without the flare and difference it. But in my experience, you just kind of have to remake it. And complain a little bit to the compers next to you. That's kind of it, unfortunately. It's doing a really good job.
Fantastic. We've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm having to just scroll quickly and be selective. So Jennifer, what are the best skills to showcase on your showreel?
Great question. So for a compositing showreel, 3 shots: keying shot, a projection shot, and a CG integrated into a plate shot. Those then cover kind of like everything you need to show off as a compositor. You might want to add some roto prep in there as well, but a lot of the roto prep jobs now with TV, there's way more junior comp roles, and people are going, like a lot of students I teach go straight into junior comp roles, and most people are, if they're good, which didn't used to be the case. So yeah, I would say keying shot, projection shot, and CG compositing shot into a plate would be the kind of the smallest show where you could get away with, and then nothing over 1 minute 30. So yeah.
What about music? Because that's always a thing I see.
I like having music personally. I mean, it doesn't matter if they turn it off. At least it's got a nice like beat and editing timing thing. So yeah, whack some music in. Why not? Just don't make it like anything too controversial.
Okay.
If it's killing in the name of, maybe not.
What's the difference between the normal color space node and the OCIO color space node? Which one would you use and for what case?
I generally use the OCIO. I mean, color space node is kind of like I use it for doing color spacey stuff. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I kind of use it to do like the HSV trick. Or maybe you change your green screen to lab color space and then try and do a key off it. OCIO node, I'm using for more kind of actual color space stuff. Like, okay, this was shot in this camera, so I'm going to need to use this particular color space. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can talk more on that point than me.
The nodes are very similar, just the OCIO node is using the OCIO color space, so the Open Color library, whereas Nuke's color space node is using Nuke's default library, but they achieve the same goal. It's just about what access to what color spaces you want or what access to what LUTs you want. So yeah. Let's see.
Oh wait, I'll have a look at the questions as well.
Oh, I mean, I'm trying to just find ones that'll help the majority of people.
Oh, someone's saying best way to move from roto prep into compositing. That is a great question. Okay, a few things that you can do. If you're in the industry already as a roto prep artist, it's all about showing people that you're so incredibly passionate about comping and actually showing them that you're doing the work. Most roto prep guys want to get into comp, but they don't actually kind of like put in the work. So if you can stay a little later at work or even ask people questions. So again, what I used to do, open up people's Nuke comps, go in there, find some stuff that you don't understand, try and work it out yourself. If you still don't understand it, in today's situation, drop them a message on whatever you're using in-house and just ask them, hey, look, I noticed how you're doing this thing in your Nuke comp. It was a really cool shot. I was wondering if you could just explain to me how it works because I'm not quite understanding it. If you do that more and more, you'll start becoming kind of known that you're kind of like really searching for this knowledge and you're really passionate about it. So that's number one, what I'd say. I'd also say practice in your spare time, because what happens is you have a show that goes mental and then they'll have to rope in rotor prep guys because they need a load of compers quickly. And you need to be able to just like turn up when that happens. I had a friend of mine at the mill who was a runner, and he was basically working there late one night, and they said, oh man, we need someone to kind of like quickly key this shot. He was like, I don't mind just sitting down and quickly keying it. And he just knocked it out of the park, and next week he was a comper. It's nuts. Like, it was like, holy crap. But that can really happen. So it's all about showing people that you're passionate, you want to do comping, and you're trying to learn as much as you can. And you do that by just kind of asking questions to compers and then following up with the knowledge. You've got to make sure you're getting as good as you can when you get the opportunity, because it will come. Something else you can do as well, if you fancy it, is you could move company and try and move into a junior comp role. It's kind of up to you, but that's another way of getting around it as well.
Nice.
So yeah.
We can actually extend, if you have time, Josh, by 15 minutes. So hopefully we can get a few more questions. Appreciate your time so much.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, so let's have a look. Oh, what utility passes do you like to use? What are some of your favorites? Great webinar.
Position reference, which is basically position ref is basically like, imagine my elbow, the number one is always on my elbow. So I could make an alpha channel that's stuck to my elbow then, which is really cool. Next one is position world, which is kind of like this area in space is the number one. So now if I make an alpha channel here, as I walk through it, I'll be then going into the alpha channel. You might be wondering why that's actually useful, but on Jungle Book, for instance, as a tiger is walking through the rainforest, they might come into pools of light. Right, maybe not the rainforest. Who knows what the places they're in? But they might be coming into pools of light. So you'd want to make an alpha channel in the world, like imagine like a sphere in the world. And as your CG render walks into that sphere, now an alpha channel is made and it captures them, right? So then you can add light basically and fake it in comp. It's kind of nuts how much you can fake light in comp, and this is why lighters kind of end up hating you sometimes, because you can't really like play around. But luckily me and Chris are still friends, but like you can really you can really change, like, so like lighting, you can add light. So position reference, position world are really important. Normals pass is great for relighting as well. And I mean, Z depth is pretty useful as well. And ST, like a UV map, can be quite good for kind of retexturing stuff. Yeah, those are kind of the standard I generally use. Position ref and crypto mats incredibly useful as well. Like if you've got a crypto mat, normals pass and position passes, man, you can fix a lot of bad CG like by doing that. And some companies rely on that a lot. Like they rely so heavily on their comp team to really be making use of those passes. So yeah, those would be my go-to.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important. If ever there's a pass that you don't understand, take the time to go and explore it and learn about it, because really you'll decide what passes are most valuable to use in your comp shots, rather than just trying to, I mean, all the ones Josh lists are actually fantastic, but you know, you may not need them for certain shows, and then you don't really want to be requesting passes that aren't needed.
Yeah, and that comes back to the relationship with the lighter, right? Like if you can if you understand the pass, then you go, hey man, would you be able to kick out a normals pass? Because I'm going to use it to add this certain thing on it. So it's just, again, yeah, definitely understand the stuff that you're getting kicked out.
I like this one because it bounces back on a previous thing. What would you use to fix a problem that would involve an edge extend? Because you don't like the edge extend.
I don't like edge extend. So the reason why I don't like edge extends is because we've got I've got this grey hoodie on, and I've got my skin color. Now, these are very different colors. If I were to cut myself out and then edge extend this gray color will then end up here, and I'll end up with a gray edge around my face. So I don't like edge extends because of that. And what happens is it gets you like 80% of the way there, and then the last 20% are horrible to fix because you're literally going around finding all these edges, trying to manually fix them, and it's just not fun. So the situation I'm in at the moment where I could have used it is there's a guy holding onto a cliff, and the cliff edge for some reason in the plate, it's got weird kind of like the blue channel is more blurred than the green channel and the red channel. So it's like giving you weird chromatic aberration. It isn't chromatic aberration. It's kind of a weird edge on stuff. So at the moment, I've been grading it. So I invert my alpha channel and then I just grade the edge basically. Now, the problem with that is obviously coming back to here, we've got dark bits of my hoodie, light bits of hoodie. So it's not a uniform gray color, which then means I have to do some luma key and other fancy stuff. But if I just edge extended that, it would have been way easier. Now, as long as his hand, where he's holding onto the edge, doesn't come in close to where I'm using the edge extend, I don't have to worry now about the edge contamination. So yeah, I should have just sucked it up and used the edge extend basically. But we will learn. We're all learning. We're all here to learn.
It's about finding the right tool for the job. And like you say, if you're aware of the limitations of a tool for your uses, then you can find new solutions, or you can say this is now actually a good time to use it. But,
exactly. And a good framework, by the way, to have in your head if you are working out what tool is always start with the most procedural and work down. Like always start with the most procedural, like the least time consuming to most time consuming. That should always be your the way you're thinking about things and using things and trying them out.
Wow, I keep trying to catch up on the questions, but new ones keep getting added. Awesome to have such great questions, by the way. I really won't be able to get to all of them now. Okay. Why should a junior learn how to match two plates when there are amazing tools out there that do it for you? Match grade, for example.
Match grade. So match grade isn't going to do your job for you. You can't just click a button because there's also like that thing could be moving in depth. So now you're going to have like black levels that are changing and your contrast is going to be changing. I would do it by eye. Honestly, just do it by eye. Because if you put the match grade in as well, and the client wants it to be a different color, now you kind of got to hack some stuff and put some grade nodes afterwards. And it's just use a grade node, man. Do it the proper way. that would be, but again, maybe this is like the edge extend thing, right? So understand the match grade, but generally use a grade node.
Okay, cool. We've got this one. Can you be a good and successful comp artist without also being a TD?
This actually is a really good question. So in the industry, I mean, you know this as well, Chris. In the industry, you get kind of like, as a comper, you get the more creative compers and then the more techie compers. It's kind of like this balance of people. So some people are like very good at the creative and they're just kind of like amazing. They've got an amazing eye. They can come up with these incredible looks. And then some people go towards the other side where they're very techie. So they like building the tools and maybe they're a little less creative. Now, that's not to say you can be one and not the other, but that's generally what I've found. Like the more techie, there's kind of like the more techie people and the more creative people. And then people are kind of in the middle. I kind of like fluctuate depending on the company I'm at. Like I remember at ILM, I was sat next to this amazing guy and I'm good friends with a guy called Miguel, who's like an amazing comper at ILM. He does some amazing shots there. And whenever I'm sat near him or I see his work, I'm like, oh man, I need to go in the creative way. And then I look on kind of Nukepedia and stuff, and Adrian Poyer is a good friend of mine. And kind of I see his like blink script stuff he's making. I'm like, oh man, I need to go in the techie way. So I'm constantly torn between these two things. But you don't need to be a TD at all. I would say I would focus on keying, color grading, understanding a bit of Nuke, like general math in the grade nodes and things, and projections and that kind of stuff. Like you don't need, that's kind of what you need to know. If you want to learn Python things, do it because you enjoy it. A little bit is helpful, obviously. But yeah, you don't have to be it to be a comper, and there's kind of two camps really. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's see. Always a tricky one for comp artists, especially students trying to skill up essentially. But you know, what are good places or ways to get resources to practice?
There's Tears of Still, which is quite a good one. If you Google like Tears of Still, they released all their green screen footage for free, and it's kind of like 4K, I think.
Can you repeat that again? I didn't catch it. Tears
of Still. I think it's STEEL. And that they released all their green screen footage for free. So that's a really great one. Mm-hmm. But if I'm honest, it is a pain in the ass trying to find, because if you're a lighter, then, or if you're a texture artist or a model, let's say, you can kind of like do stuff in your own world. But us compositors, we rely on kind of like getting the CG from someone. And like you could do the best comp in the world and the animation could be rubbish. So, so this is actually a real issue. So like, and I don't want to kind of plug it, but on my site, Compositing Pro, I noticed this issue and I basically just bought projects off people. I just like went, okay, screw it. There's not any good stuff to practice on. I'm just going to buy projects off people and then kind of sell them on my website for way less than I bought them for. So, I mean, yeah, it is tricky finding some. I would say you could also team up with people that you know are lighters and things. But yes, it is tricky. I mean, that's why I would say practice on like keying and projections first, because then you don't have to kind of like buy any CG resources and plate and any of that stuff, because you can use the tiers of still stuff to do that. But yeah, it is tricky.
I do think there's value in taking, if you have the time, because we obviously don't all have the time to do everything we'd like to, but if you can, there is value in taking a month or a few weeks to learn how to just quickly model something really simple. I always think like a robot is easiest because it's all just boxes. Texture it, rig it if you really want to. You don't really have to if you're doing comp stuff, though. You can just do rubbish translation animation. But by learning the skills that your the people you'll be collaborating with, you'll learn more about what you can get access to from them, and you can talk with them better. I think the communication aspect of it is really, really helpful.
Yes, definitely. And if you're a comper as well, go outside and shoot your own stock footage. Just get a kettle, get a black sheet. There you go. There's some smoke stock footage.
I mean, you should know how to understand a camera anyway. If you're that's very important. If you want to be a compositing artist, understand how light works with a camera through the lens, why you get lens artifacts, why you get chromatic aberration, why that lens flare question earlier, how objects pass between a light source and the sensor of your camera will affect your lens flares, and you need to understand that in order to accurately reproduce it.
Just exposure as well. I mean, most films kind of get exposure wrong because the director wants them to kind of be able to see everything. But if you look at most explosions in films, they would just be blown out. Like, look how bright the light is behind, right? Look how blown out that light is there. I mean, in any film, if that was an explosion, you'd be able to see all the details in it. So if you understand exposure as well, it's incredibly important.
Okay. I saw
Someone
a question.
What cryptomat is. So a cryptomat is basically a pass that you can kick out of a render engine, and it allows you in Nuke to use a cryptomat node, and you can then select kind of like material. And now you have an alpha channel on Transformers, for instance, that when I was on that, we had an issue where when Bumblebee was kind of like in a blue light, he'd go green, he'd look green. So he has to be that Bumblebee yellow. So we had then used the cryptomat to select the material, everything that was car paint, and it allowed us then to have an alpha channel of everything that was that car paint yellow that we could then grade in comp. So cryptomat is just a nicer way of making alpha channels with your CG render. Check it out. It's really useful.
Nice. Okay, we have one last question that we can answer. Do you have one that you'd like to pick from the list, or would you like me to pick one?
I think, yeah, you go for it, man.
I really like this question from, well, the name is Letters. But thanks for the webinar. Is being a compositor in advertising, does basically being a comp in advertising require a different skill set than in feature film? Because you balance between feature film and advertising work. Yeah, it's not really. It's just the speed. And again, it's kind of that whole process where you kind of work down from top to bottom of quickest to slowest. I think in ads, you kind of hack stuff more together. So I found it quite fun because you're kind of working very quickly and you're kind of using Nuke in ways you'd never use Nuke. So I walked in one day and had to do this like confetti particle simulation. I was like, okay, we've run out of money for effects. Okay, let's just try and do it in Nuke. Okay. But it's all the same skills. A lot of it is when it comes to tech checks and checking edges and have you brought every single hair back from the plate? Because in ads, if you're selling a Coke commercial, if it's the Olympic commercial or something, maybe you don't care so much about that because you know everyone's going to be watching it on smaller screens. So it's mainly the difference I found is the tech check area. That's where the big difference was, and kind of comparing back to the plate and make sure you brought back all the details. Exactly the same skills, it's just you're going to maybe be asked to do some odd stuff, which is quite interesting. And the cool thing is the clients are in as well. So that makes it an added little thing there where they're sat behind you asking questions and asking for stuff. Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up now because on the dot it will stop this session. So just a massive thank you to you, Josh, for the webinar and for sticking around to answer all these questions. And a massive thank you to everyone who joined. Is there anything to say before we cut off? Well, thanks so much for coming, guys. Honestly, it was kind of amazing kind of seeing where you're all from, which is nuts. If you do have any questions, just drop me an email or on my website.
And I do kind of training and one-on-one training. So if you fancy doing any of that, then just let me know. But yeah, thanks for the founder as well for inviting me on. Hopefully the webinar was useful for everyone. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you all once again. And hopefully you'll join us for future webinars and future stuff. And yeah, we're always really excited to put these on. So cheers.
Perfect. I hope you guys are all staying safe wherever you are in the world.
Yeah. See ya. Bye.